I think it is important to state my childhood background to give clarity to my response to the question of what I had dreamed of or hoped for during the martial period of martial law in the Philippines. Being a toddler when martial law was declared, I was oblivious to what was happening around me. I grew up in the time of martial law, so it was the norm for me. I remember having four TV stations, one of which was a government station that somehow had the more entertaining evening shows, but were frequently interrupted by the president coming on air, which in hindsight came on more frequently in the late 70s and early 80s, until the revolution came to be. Or at least perhaps my parents didn't bring us to places with a strong military presence because, as it was explained to me, they were there to defend us from the communist rebels, always brewing trouble in the more rural and secluded areas. We attended a Catholic school, all four of us children. I don't remember politics being discussed there, nor was it discussed at home until I entered high school in 1982. Our eldest sister was off to college, the University of the Philippines in Diliman, and when she came home on weekends, she would tell us stories that she would hear on campus. Politics were a touchy topic at family gatherings until the day Benigno, Ninoy Aquino, was assassinated in 1983. When the economy plummeted after this assassination, I recall not only having to fight for canned goods and toilet paper, but having to crimp on all our daily needs. We used wood to cook with instead of propane gas. We stocked up on dried fish just in case. We had to appreciate canned sardines. Life went on, but it just wasn't the same. People didn't want it to be the same. They definitely didn't want it to be worse. Marcus acted like he cared. With the permission of my dad and with the secrecy from my mom, who had separated from my dad and moved to the US a year before, my sisters and I went to the polls to protect the ballots and that carried to protect the ballots that carried the cries for change by the many Filipinos who no longer wanted to be caged in the lies and deception of the market. By this time, two of my sisters were in the same university. My sisters attended rallies instead of classes. Our dad brought us with him to some of these rallies. I remember how exciting it was to see the massive crowds gathered to see Cory Aquino or just simply to hear what she had to say. It helped us to keep going. I was a senior in high school. My classmates and I were getting ready for college. We were also part of an ROTC program that required us to visit the military base nearby. We did it one Friday afternoon after the snap elections. I can't recall anymore what we did while we were on the base, but that evening we heard on the news that a small band of soldiers were leading a coup d'etat. They took over the base we were just at. I remember being grateful to God that they didn't go there while we were still on the base. At first, my dad didn't want us to go to EDSA, a major thoroughfare where people gathered to protest the actions of Marcos and his cronies, because my mom called to tell him that she didn't want anything bad to happen to her children. But the need to express our revolt against the current regime just became stronger. So, as one family, we went to EDSA. We had to walk quite a distance since the roads were blocked. We prayed, we spoke with strangers who were family after all. We endured and we rejoiced with everyone there. I consider myself a very simple person with simple dreams, even when I was young. My dream was to become a doctor. Not really simple, but they just inspired me so much when I entered high school. Our dad did not fail in reminding us the value of education. So at the very least, the dream was confined to what I could see and hear. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to see if I could become a doctor. We wanted that change. We wanted Marcos gone. We wanted a more peaceful country where we wouldn't be afraid of what we had to say, even in private gatherings. We wanted to have a future where we can say that a job was waiting for us. I guess that was my dream. That is how my life was under martial law and the little participation I had in the EDSA revolution, and for which I was still grateful. And I hope and pray that this new government will not be as bad as his father, and that people will actually take action, the necessary action. up in the area of Metro Manila. So when we would leave that area, there were several stops stationed by military personnel. But the island provinces, however, were not as then when it was when she was a sophomore in college when politics already came to the dinner table. We heard stories of acquaintances or neighbors disappearing, never to be found again. We were told that they either crossed a government official or a soldier. We started hearing of journalists going through the same fate. It must have been the turning point for many, including my uncle's wife, because suddenly she became active in politics, at least in the local scene. It was she who encouraged us to do what we could in the circumstance that we were in. Aquino's death awoke in many of us Filipinos, both young and old, the need for a change and the courage to fight for it. He called for snap elections to show the world that he is still who the Filipino wanted to be their leader. However, we were aware that Marcos and his cronies were ready with many schemes to make sure he gets a sweep in the polls, the Marcoses. And yet, the Batasang Pambansa, the legislative branch of the government, declared Marcos the winner on February 7, 1986. This just brewed the anger of the people even stronger. Cory Aquino, the widow of Ninoy, ran against Marcos at the snap elections, and she called for the people to revolt in a nonviolent manner.
Plus, you have to bear in mind that the full story of the martial law years will probably never be unearthed because insofar as the history books are concerned, the history that's being taught to the students, that has actually been whitewashed. Mm-hmm. It has been, it's not a realistic depiction of what had actually happened. Mm-hmm. So you have to, the history that's being taught to the younger people because, well, for one, the younger Marcos is back, and I think that's one of his, one of the things that they're trying to do is also kind of fix history to make them not look so bad. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately,
to Sylvia and I,
perception is real, and the truth is not.
So, at least it's good to sit down.
Did you? You just continue the conversation.
Yeah, we're continuing. We have a story about back in early 1971, 72. That was a complete news blackout because television was off. All radios were nobody to tune into, and it was a complete news blackout. And the next thing we knew, we heard that in so many other streets, as witnessed by some people who tried to do their normal routine, they saw several soldiers in several various intersections in the street, and school was canceled. Everything was a complete standstill. Work was closed, and because nobody knew what was happening, we thought the country was in a war. And then, and growing up, I was only around 13, 14 years old then. But of course, when we heard that, I remember Grandpa. We have a shotgun at home. We do. And he started pulling it out, and he just said, just be ready, whatever it is. But of course, we were young. He didn't want to scare us, but we do have a shotgun at home. And something's happening, and then until all of a sudden, all over in the television, the president appeared, and that was the big announcement. And to my recollection, he said that it's something that the country's under threat by infiltrators or people who are trying to instigate rebellion or to take over the government. And that was the reason why he declared martial law. And that was it. But prior to this declaration, there had been so many complaints about government. The abuse of so many of the president and its family and people close to the Marcoses back those years. People were really taken advantage of. There was really so many people, his most especially his political enemies, really were threatened. Some were killed, ambushed, and kidnapped, and never came back to their respective. First thing, I was so happy because we didn't have any class for a long time. That was a fact. And it was just like every time that we heard about it, the impact was not until I see from Grandpa when he started taking out those, and I was the oldest boy in the family, and he told me where he keeps this gun. It's inside their dresser, their cabinet, and but he didn't want to panic or didn't want to scare us. But we didn't have any cell phones. Phone lines were down also, if you could believe that. Everything. No TV, no radio, nothing. And then boom, all of a sudden, that public.
And I think at that time, there was a control of the media. So I think there may have been one newspaper that came out that had no martial law declared. And what I recall about martial law curfew, that they put in a curfew for everybody that you have to be inside your homes by a certain time. I don't know. I don't remember what I was. So there was a curfew for a couple of months, I think it was. And we did have martial law for many, many years, right? But I think as the years progressed, it became a little lax. It was very strict in the beginning, that's what I recall.
And then all of a sudden now we started educating people under the martial law. What are the rules? What are the guidelines, the restrictions? Everything you say against the government is used against you, no matter what, whether you're right or wrong. So, people were so quiet, and because you never know, you have to know that somebody could be knocking on your door and just hold you captive.
How do they know you're going to say something?
No, because they have people who spies around.
Oh, they have like spies?
Civilian spies.
And I think
civilian cronies, they call it.
And then during this time, this is where
Cronies?
Yes. Cronies are people who are aligned to the government or whoever's in position. And of course, they can spy on you, they could years, right? And then he came to the point that, Marcus, he was a visionary. He was very smart. He was very, he has bright ideas for the future of the country. But, however, he became so greedy towards the end. So, in other words, let's not take it out of him because Philippines flourished and became.
The discipline of the people is very important. What had to change was the attitude of the people, and that the only way you could implement that is by declaring this martial law.
In
the people power.
There was what we call the people power, because people got so mad. There was blatant corruption. All the wealth that he was amassing with his family. People got so mad that there was kind of within the military. It was supported by certain factions of the military. So what we had in 1980, what year was that, Dad? People.
all. But it was through non-violent means, just like Indira Gandhi, who popularized that. You can, you could topple any system of government through non-violent means, and that's exactly what the Philippines. In the Philippines, that's what had happened, and it was led, mind you, by religious leaders. It was led by various sectors of the country
And certain
and certain
factions
politicians, and that's why his greatest enemy was Ninoy Aquino, who was, I think, if you do further research, who was on exile here. He was on a political asylum here in the United States, and they lived in Boston together with the wife and his family.
who was returning back to the Philippines, and he kept exposing all the corruption.
Wait, he died in the
atrocities.
airport?
Yeah.
He was getting off the air, off the,
And then he got
off
shot
the
right there
airplane,
and
and he
there.
was on the tarmac, and he got shot. And then, but you know how it goes around, and yeah, but it's a kind
The
of
way they portrayed it was a known assailant. A known assailant who sneaked into the airport and did the shooting. And the government denied it. It was never their plot.
Before that? No, before, when Ninoy Aquino died, he was assassinated. He was interned in his home with all the blood on the houses. And the family deliberately, when somebody's interned, everything's fixed up and everything. But I went there personally myself and went to his house in Crescent City and braved those long hours of flying just to get a view of him, his political Benigno Aquino. And the research that was his greatest enemy and his greatest critic. And
Just like what Russia's doing right now. That's all the
Controlled media.
Kim Jong Un, North Korea is the same. These are all dictators. These are all, and that's the authoritarian form of government that continues to
control the media.
control and dictate upon what he wants the people to hear. Anything against him, anything against the Marcoses was a complete blackout. So you have various people that had resisted government in 3-4 different forms. One were those who completely had left their home, either had went on exile, went through the mountains, and they formed alliances with what they call New People's Army, which is the communist resistance government, a guerrilla movement in the Philippines. And those people are away from the metropolis. They're all in hiding in the mountains, in those terrains.
And basically trying to influence at the grassroots level. So, right?
Right. So that's number one. So to get away from this soldiers who are aligned with Marcos, those people went away, moved to the mountains. There were those who went through other countries through political asylum. But of course, not everybody. There's one known political figure. He's called founder of communism, the Philippines, Joe Marie Sison. Joe Marie Sison. And he also went to our University of the Philippines.
And he exiled here in the States.
No, at first, he went to Southeast Asia and eventually settled here in the United States. He already died a couple of years, more than 10 years ago. And then, so those were those who went up the mountains, because the mountains are very tough terrain and this communist people, there's no doubt that there was such a popular movement. communism was started to become popular, and it continues to spread. That's what the United States has been fighting for, because either communistic government or democratic government, and they're trying to sell their idea that this is the single best system, the democratic or capitalistic form of government. In contrary, with communism, there's you don't own anything. All your property is owned by government. Not even your home, not even your everything is communal. That's where it comes from. Everything's communal. No, you don't own anything. You can't own a piece of land. Everything's by the government. So that's what it is. But America is capitalistic. Communism was spreading like wildfire in Asia and other Asian countries, being converted by.
And I guess for the impoverished people, for the very poor people, that is very attractive to them, because then they know that they're not going to get hungry, that the government will take care of them. So.
Just can you pass me that?
Well, I mean, it's a balance. It's not
It
like
is,
it's,
but
you're just saying it in essence, you know.
Yeah, but anyway, but going back to, I think we're veering.
You guys are veering.
Yeah, we're talking about.
No, but it's good to understand what the history is. Why martial law? Why?
So that was one of the things that was one of the reasons why martial law was implemented, is because they wanted to get a grip of the rising communistic communism in the Philippines.
That's what they that they front, just to justify, so to speak, why they declared martial law. So he was losing grip, and of course the most important thing is so he could continue with his program that he had initially initiated, but because following that term limits, he was going to run out of time, and of course the military was the one who controlled everything. Because if you're the Marcos, the best protection that you can have are the soldiers, because they're the one who's going to protect you. So how could you have the soldiers get to protect you? By feeding them too. So they're the ones giving them power. So people, the generals, all the ranked officials have so much power. They own vast properties. Considering that, generals, those ranked officers, they shouldn't be getting much, with that salary or the wages that they're getting. They're not supposed to earn as much. But anyhow, so that was the martial law. But back those years, no freedom of speech, no freedom of assembly. You could not gather in large groups. Of course, no freedom of press. So anything that you say against the government, you could be picked up. You don't know civilian clothesmen. And one of that too is my cousin, first degree cousin, Uncle Lolo Ben, if you remember Lolo Ben.
I think so.
Yeah.
But in the case of the students in college,
there was the right of all the student activism. This is the years when, like, my older siblings would be in college, and there would be what they call rallies. Not a lot of different types of trying to be controlled the students. But there's a lot of student activism engaged. Because obviously the students, especially those who are in university, obviously, they had the courage and they were strong, and they had no fear compared to obviously the other people. So,
one of the people and I went to the University of the Philippines, which is one of the leaders, in fact, leading proponents of this getting involved with students actually involved with the politics of what's happening to the country. And of course, the brilliant minds, a lot of brilliant minds, even the president, Marcos himself, came from the University of the Philippines. I came out likewise with Ateneo graduate graduation went to the University of the Philippines as well. A lot of political grades came from University of the Philippines, University of the Philippines, the lawmakers, those people.
Wait a minute, let me see.
We were in college from
Yeah,
76
yeah,
to
70, back in the 80s, early 80s. And I remember I skipped my class and we went to what's called Mendiola. Mendiola is a street that is a street before you get to the presidential palace, to Malacanang.
like the White House of the Philippines.
Like the White House
Malacanang.
of the Philippines
Where-
called Malacanang Palace. It's an Enye. So I remember I've been there at least twice because of because I know some of my friends that I met through some of my classes were really diehard. I wasn't that diehard because number one, I'm gonna get in trouble with your lolo and lola. I'm so scared. But the deep grassroots one, oh my gosh, they care less. Their life, they'll be taking. But in other words, but I see the influence, the vision that they were talking about. And if we don't, there's a motto that they say,
In Tagalog, kung hindi ngayon, kailan. Which means it's translated in English. If it is not going to happen now, when? If it's not us, who will? Something like that. So it was really challenging the people to stand up for this military rule and don't be afraid. But of course, people we
have some
Yeah,
friends
yeah,
in
and
the
they-
university that we never saw, that
Yeah.
got picked up at the middle of the night in their homes. Was their homes got raided by plainclothesmen, but you know who they are. It's a military,
It's
and
like
they
undercover cops. Yeah.
not just cops, like
Yeah,
military,
no,
like think of them as like Navy SEALs or
Yeah.
something like that, and they snatch people who speaks against government, and that's it.
Yeah,
JB Bautista was one.
yeah.
There was, I think,
What's his name from UPSCA? Gosh. Yeah, there's a,
I know of at least
Teddy,
about
Teddy,
Teddy?
Teddy,
Yeah, yeah.
Teddy Cruz, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple, maybe a handful. I want to say a handful.
Around less than maybe, because in where Tita Sylvia and I met was, they call it the University of Philippines School Catholic Action, but some are joining that group on the disguise of being a Catholic organization. They would be they won't be as much under the radar, but they're also infiltrators with communistic ideologies.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So the same people they were fighting?
Students, right? Of course, if you join like a group like where
Yeah.
school Catholic, and of course
They would
under the
use-
guise of
yeah.
religion, and you won't be as much under the radar of the military
Yeah, you'll be more under the
because
radar.
these people are good people, these people are
Yeah.
doing social
They use
social
the,
civic organizations. They take care of the poor, they take care of whatsoever. But some of them, but we didn't realize, was using that front. But they were starting to influence people within our peers. And that's why, if you going back to your question, perhaps at least we know, I heard of, some were not really directly my friends, but they're under the group. Perhaps around less than 10 or so. But we know them personally, some of them, but we're not very close. So when I spoke with some of those people, you know what? They just made perfect sense. My eyes were open to what's going on. And that's why I understood their concern and plea. And that's why at a certain point, I did join the movement. I was not the radical communist or what, but I joined some rallies in go marching towards the palace.
Which is part of student activism in
Yes.
those days. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the students
So
we were very idealistic. We, you know, we were saying we're the hope of this nation. If, you know, so that's what he was talking about. Does that answer all your? I mean, of course, we will never be able to do justice for all those many years. This is just based on our
No,
recollections.
you are. Right?
Probably just a small
They're lucky to have you.
piece of the whole pie.
And
You know, we were
should ask
young
all
and we
of
were
us
not.
if you need like help.
We were not
like,
politically
you know,
savvy, I
choosing
guess.
where you wanna go.
We were students.
But see, under the military rule, even priests, you know, because one of the people that really led
Yeah, it's a good problem to have.
led the people because of their moral conviction. The priests themselves, you know, in the pulpit, on their sermons, they attacked government. They really used that pulpit. But of course, the government could not question them. But of course, there were some priests, bishops that were cuffed, you know, was put to jail. Same.
Yeah, I think
Women,
yeah.
young, old alike.
Actually, if you recall, my brother ended up in the, you know, along with a lot of the student activists during their time, they had to be bailed out by my parents because, you know, because they were
Because the
showing-
curfew.
Yeah. No. It's also it's also because of all the student activist movement.
So it was a dark year in the history of the Philippines.
Dark years.
Those were the dark years of the Philippines, wherein thousands and thousands of people got killed, never recovered. I mean, their bodies never recovered, and there was even nowhere to complain to, because the people you complain to, there's no judicial system. Of course, there's no, you know,
Everything was
the
controlled.
executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Nothing of those stripe.
Because they were all controlled by the government.
All
That's the reason. They
controlled by
probably-
the dictator.
They were there in existence, but they were all puppets of the dictator. So
But this is the controversial part then, because America stood up for that president. You know, why? Because they benefit from the Marcos years as well, too.
but you have to remember, at that time, there were U.S. bases in the Philippines also. So I think that had something to do.
U.S.
with it.
Naval Base, Clark Air Base, the Air Force Base,
Yeah.
which is a very strategic
Yeah.
position, location, because the spread of communism coming from China and other neighboring Vietnam, the northern part of Vietnam. It was
So that's
spreading,
I think it all kind
and
of,
that's why they installed that. And guess what? Now they're doing the same thing. In the Philippines, they have like 13 U.S. bases there, spread throughout the country, because of the threat again of China being so aggressive. Because now of being a very superior naval power in Southeast Asia. So,
you know, it was good to be experiencing a scary experience, but I'm sure where we are right now explains the resilience that we have, because we've got those dark ages of the country, and that made us tougher. why, they say, Philippines are so hardworking because we know what it's like being suppressed. We know what it's like being under that kind of rule.
The irony of it all is the dictator that was toppled down after several years. His dynasty continues because now his son is now the president, which is another long story, but
through cheating, influence, and everything.
yeah, I mean, I guess depending upon what side you're on, but for us who have gone through
Those.
martial law, and for us who have experienced the older Marcos,
We won't forget that.
We will not forget that. That's why I guess it depends upon you. Maybe the younger people and the majority of the population of the Philippines are now the younger people, which I think maybe not a lot of them
Don't even know the old Marcos.
Yeah. Plus, but
when the presidential elections back in 2020, there was this opponent of the son of the dictator, the old dictator, was running. We were so much behind that lady, Leni Robredo. And I personally joined several rallies around here I was in Orange County, I was in downtown LA, I was in several of those caravans. I was here in West Covina Island Pacific area. Even Lolo Ernie was there with me. And I went to at least about 5 events with the hope that the son of the old dictator won't win, but he still won from cheating. So anyway, that's the thing that even your dad, during the time of people power, so martial law was declared 72, and Marcos was toppled, and was kidnapped by United States and brought to Hawaii in 1986.
No, the term is not kidnapped. He sought asylum.
Sought asylum.
But
because people were already in Malacanang, they could not control the droves of people, thousands and thousands.
Just imagine the White House. I mean, just imagine the White House being taken over by people. So that's what happened.
And that's how they found out. They went inside, saw the thousands and thousands of pairs of shoes of Imelda. You probably heard that. And then all the money that they stole from people, all the treasury was really robbed,
And then they had lived a very luxurious life.
Swedish account,
Not Swiss.
Swiss account. People were already in Malacanang. They could not control the droves of people, thousands and thousands.
Just imagine the White House. I mean, just imagine the White House being taken over by people. So that's what happened.
And that's how they found out. They went inside, saw the thousands and thousands of pairs of shoes of Imelda. You probably heard that. And then all the money that they stole from people, all the treasury was really robbed,
And then they had lived a very luxurious life.
Swedish account,
Not Swiss.
Swiss account.
Not Sweden.
Swiss account, everything that was disclosed and whatever they caught, that's why they froze all their assets up until of late. When this son
Took over.
won the presidency
Won in quotation marks.
through cheating. So
what do you?
Can you imagine there were tanks in front of you, but people cared less? You don't know if that soldier would pull that trigger and those shoot the people, and there's millions of people.
You have to remember that it is very dramatic. I think you should still be able to pull out some of the pictures from that event. But one of the turning points of the EDSA revolution, People Power Revolution. So you had on one side all the tanks and all the military people, and the frontliners on the civilian side were nuns, priests. The soldiers on the other side did not have the heart to attack the frontliners that were nuns and priests and lay people. They just didn't.
No arms, no rifles, nothing.
They just didn't have the. These soldiers are people with hearts, so they just didn't have the, I guess, the heart to attack the frontliners on the
Plus,
civilian
they
side.
realized that really, in their conscience, some of them already eventually turned towards the side against, even some military were against the Marcoses.
Because it is common knowledge that there was a lot of corruption. So probably the soldiers that were on the frontliners knew that they were on the wrong side of the fence, that it wasn't worth defending, because they knew, everybody knew that there was a lot of corruption. That so that kind of just.
Plus, there's the special military, which was led by an elite. It's like the West Point of the Philippines. They call it PMA, Philippine Military Academy. These are like the top of the generals. A lot of the top generals come from that academy. So it's like the West Point of here. This is like the Annapolis of the military, and the regular soldiers are from more of the grassroots, but the top generals comes from that academy, the Philippine Military Academy. And there was a certain movement, like a fraternity within the PMA, that started collaborating and taking sides to the people, because out of their conscience, out of their they realized that there was a total abuse of power, and they call it RAM, Reform Armed Movement, like the RAM, but they're all top brass generals that try to convince the other soldiers from the other side, here, you join us, this is way too much, this is not us, this is not, we're sworn to protect our very own people. And that's why, little by little, Marcos started losing those people who used to protect him and taking sides with this Reformed Armed Movement. And that's why, except for what we call the loyalists, towards the end, prior to the exile, at the back of the palace, that's where there was an escape route of the Marcos. United States had sent helicopters to block him out of the palace and brought him to the air base. Yeah, in Clark Air Base, and then from there took off with the Air Force escorts, and then landed in Hawaii. So that's in a nutshell. But it's good to be part of the history. That's why what's happening in the United States is a different story.
That's okay. This is not the point. That's a different.
But this is your future. What's happening to the society, to the United States? You are all invested in this. You're the future generation. Your children's children, and that's why it's good to be involved. Take part. That's why we and I are very passionate about knowing what your rights are, being passionate what is right and what is just. And I'm a big, really supporter of the oppressed, because we know what it's like being oppressed by a tyrant, by somebody who has all the means. That's why my love for the poor is that immense, because we were once poor ourselves, and we were oppressed, we were suppressed.
Beef, all on top.
No, Mikey, it's fine. You can.
Water for everyone? Okay, so how many waters?
This thing's following you.
Galilee continue their work as fishermen. It is clear that their lives have been transformed by their contact with Jesus. And in today's gospel account from John, they recognized Jesus when they met him at the lake shore, and they hauled in the net at his advice and heard his guidance for their future. And of course, the impulsive enthusiasm that caused Peter to get in wrong so often while he was with Jesus continues in what we hear today. For when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tucked in his garment, for he was lightly clad, and jumped into the sea. The Holy Father remembered about Peter jumping into the sea, because it seemed to be such a strange thing that Peter had done. Father Sober's reaction symbolizes Peter being baptized into his faith after his encounter. Easy for us to criticize Peter, but we must remember that God used Peter's faith to help him believe the church of sinners who were on the way to their salvation and sanctity. Peter may have denied Jesus in the panic of the passion, with his heart of the Lord, and his personal experience of weakness makes him all already to need. God can use us as well if we allow him. The things in our life, aspects of our past that we can be dismissed as trivial, or perhaps even believe are signs of our weakness, the doubt and uncertainty that we can feel during the difficulties of life can be used by God. Used just as God used the weakness and the failings of Peter and the other apostles. The more after all the same man who ran away to deny Jesus. He forcefully and fearlessly that was reading the Acts of the Apostles. I cannot imagine what those men must have thought when they were taken before the Sanhedrin. They were obviously aware of what had happened to Jesus, and I suspect they may have thought they were going to suffer.
The beginning is now, never shall be, world without end.
Wisdom and strength, honor and glory and blessing. The passage concludes by describing the heavenly church being united with all of creation. There is no other logical way to explain the apostles' courage in the face of what they were confronted. All of us, I believe, can identify times in our lives when we've been confronted by some problem or issue that seems impossible at the time we were going through it. But when we look back, we realize that the Lord rescued us from what was going on. My wife Janet and I came to California in March of '76 from the East Coast. I worked at Honeywell at their offices on San Bernardino Road Presence in our lives.
Living waters and wine.
What's plant helplessness? Learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. It's not as profound. But learned helplessness is, I guess, a feeling of defeat. Or the way I remember it is because you've tried so many things and tried so many ways, and yet you're all led to the same solution. Like you're like your mind or your body is like disposed to expecting that failure, and you can't see it any other way. What do you scrapbooking? The view. Does this look like a cookie? I can't see it. Sure. It's okay, I don't need your approval. You know what sounds so fucking good right now? What? Shortbread cookies. The ones with the rainbow sprinkles on them. You like those? No, don't get confused with the Loft House cookies. There's a difference. I don't know. I'm not a cookie expert. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yvonne made us do it. I saw her and I got triggered.
Oh my god.
Okay,
I'm
not
so-
actually, but
No, I didn't.
she was like, "We're gonna end the out of the real world." Just yes, but no, it's like I get what he was trying to say. Like you can rely on us. Like that was the essence of it all. But I feel like you should never go about saying you're gonna support someone by saying. So that's I was gonna say that. Sometimes I catch myself making ultimatums, like as a joke. Like sometimes I'm seeing it like we'll say something stupid and I'm like,
and foremost, we already had existing policies that were supposed to help with the supposed problem of terrorism, which is what the presidency was claiming was turning into a bigger issue at the time. But some of the provisions in this new bill that they were trying to have passed, or I can't recall if it was passed actually during the time, were a bit problematic for some people because the definitions included in these provisions for what terrorism could be considered as were quite vague. So because of the lack of specificity for these definitions, this would sort of give the police a bit more liberty to sort of define a wider range of activities, even those things that aren't necessarily terrorism as such, and it would allow them to act a little bit more, what's this? It would allow them to mobilize a lot faster, and to detain people under the, under the condition that they were suspected of terrorism. So there was very little space for due process here. So the red tagging in particular was happening with some students of UP, University of the Philippines, Diliman, I believe, but I think some of the other regional campuses as well. And I think that people started reporting instances where students who had been involved in protests against this new legislation were finding their social media profiles duplicated and cloned for some reason, so they had their personal information, and they had their friends lists and stuff. And these were mostly people who were being quite vocal, both online and in face-to-face protests. I don't know how face-to-face protests work during this time, this is not but certain demonstrations. So they were having their online activities tracked as well. So people took this as a sign of I think I disconnected. Their online activities tracked as well. So people took this as a sign of overt red tagging for student activists. The security and the safety of students who had been sort of vocal with their dissent against the administration at the time. And I think the fact that it was UP students was quite alarming for people because if you don't know, the studentry of the University of the Philippines has sort of a reputation for being particularly vocal when it comes to the actions of certain administrations. So I think red tagging in the realm of a big issue, even since like in the earlier years, like 2018 and earlier. But then it was, I think, the reason why online like social media red tagging became like such a hot topic was because it coincided with the terror law disputes and stuff. So yeah, I guess my personal experience with the closest experience I had with it was that Kuya's account was one of those that was duplicated. And so this sort of spread the context of red tagging not just to those who were active student leaders, so like in face-to-face activists, activities, but also like just people voicing their opinions online. And so this sparked like a lot of debates. initially from 2020 to 2021, people started being a lot more cautious. If anything, I think they got louder, but people, especially students, started being a bit more careful about actually including things about their real identities and their identities if they were being outspoken against the administration. But I don't know how that carried over into the administration of Bongbong, because there was a transition back to hybrid face classes. And I think the concerns of the students sort of shifted. I remember I registered people here in 2021. Honestly, I think since the conflict surrounding the terroring that was contextualized within the previous administration of Duterte, I'm not sure if the impact of that policy is felt so much as far as dissent towards PBM is concerned. I feel like just the context of the pandemic and online attacking go, it might have shaped the landscape for online activism. I mean, people had any transition anyways because of the streets and lockdown. So, like 2 seconds. Yeah. I would say initially from 2020 to 2021, people started being a lot more cautious. If anything, I think they got louder, but people, especially students, being a bit more careful about actually including things about their real identities in their profiles if they were being against the administration. But I don't know how that carried over into the administration of Bongbong, because there was a transition back to hybrid and face-to-face classes. And I think concerns of the students sort of shifted during that. Yeah, to be honest, I forgot that the whole attacking thing happened until we brought it up again. So, but it was not really get preoccupied with the day-to-day concerns. So, I don't know if that's the right one. That's fine. Go ahead. How are you?
Really? Yes. Then why are we outside?
So I can eat.
Yeah. Why do you have to eat? I just fed you. What can a 56-year-old remember from her dreams as a child decades ago during martial law? Surprisingly, I do remember two of them. The first one must have occurred when I was between 4 to 5 years old. And in my dream, the soldiers came to our house, and I can't remember if they dragged my parents out or us out, but that was part of the dream. Like, I could not forget the soldiers coming into our house and the fear that was in all of us at that time. The other dream was a few years later. I must have been 9 years old. I remember it was towards the end of my 4th grade. And the dream was we were on a road trip and we got into a car accident. And I got injured and I needed to get to the hospital. But since our car was broken, we had to wait for somebody to come and get us. And in my dream, it was a foreigner, a dad and a daughter, who took us to the hospital, took me actually to the hospital along with my mom. And the eeriest thing of it all is that actually happened a few weeks later. At the end of our school year, my dad decided to take us to the beach, but due to some miscommunication, we ended up traveling at night. And we got into a car accident, and somebody behind us stopped and asked my dad what happened and if we needed help. And sure enough, it was the same guy in my dream, the same voice, the same kid, the kid asking what's happening, why are we taking these people with us? And I don't even remember why that happened, but it did happen. And that's basically it. I don't even remember anymore if I had other dreams from that time period. But those are the dreams I actually talk about once in a while with people.